Sometimes the people who change the world are the ones nobody notices until the world comes looking for them. Three polished black Cadillacs rolled slowly down the quiet main street of Maple Ridge, Nebraska, just after sunrise, their glossy reflections shimmering across storefront windows that had not changed in decades. Conversation stopped. Coffee cups remained suspended halfway to waiting lips. Mechanics, teachers, farmers, and early morning customers all turned toward the tiny auto repair garage sitting near the end of the block, wondering why vehicles usually reserved for governors or billionaires had appeared in a town where everybody knew everybody else. The engines fell silent one by one. Uniformed drivers stepped out first. Then a woman wearing an elegant navy business suit emerged from the center vehicle with calm confidence that immediately drew every eye toward her. She was graceful without arrogance, composed without distance, and despite the expensive clothing and unmistakable presence of someone accustomed to leading boardrooms, there was genuine emotion in her face. She looked beyond the curious crowd and fixed her attention on a man kneeling beside an aging blue pickup truck with grease covering his hands. Ethan Walker slowly stood, wiping his hands on an old shop towel as confusion settled across his weathered face. At 41 years old, he looked exactly like the hard-working mechanic everyone in town respected. His faded denim work shirt had been repaired more than once. His boots carried years of honest labor, and the lines around his eyes spoke of long days, quiet sacrifices, and raising a daughter alone after losing his wife years earlier. He did not recognize the woman walking toward him. She stopped only a few feet away. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The entire street seemed to hold its breath as birdsong faded beneath the stillness. Then, without warning, the elegant stranger stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Ethan froze in complete surprise, careful not to stain her expensive suit with his grease-covered hands. The crowd exchanged bewildered glances. Nobody understood what they were witnessing. The woman slowly stepped back, tears glistening in her eyes before she smiled with quiet gratitude. "Because of you," she whispered, her voice steady despite the emotion, "my son is alive." Ethan stared at her, searching his memory for an answer that refused to appear. She gently continued, "You saved 2 lives that day, even though you never knew who I was." Silence settled over the garage. Customers lowered their eyes. The town sheriff removed his hat. Even the wind seemed unwilling to interrupt the moment. Behind the woman, one of her assistants quietly carried a familiar waterproof leather document case that Ethan recognized instantly, although he had not seen it since the previous afternoon. Suddenly, the memories returned with startling clarity. The dark sky, the roaring wind, the emergency radio, the crashing waves across Silver Lake, a private jet disappearing beneath the storm. Ethan closed his eyes for only a second as the sounds of the quiet Nebraska morning slowly faded away, replaced by distant thunder, urgent radio transmissions, and a memory of a day that had begun like every other ordinary morning before becoming the moment that changed countless lives forever. The memory carried Ethan Walker back to the morning before the storm, when the world still felt ordinary and every familiar sound promised another predictable day. His alarm rang at 5:30, long before the first light reached the quiet streets of Maple Ridge, Nebraska. He rose without complaint, pulled on his faded denim work shirt, and quietly crossed the hallway to wake his 9-year-old daughter. Lily was already awake, sitting on her bed with colored pencils scattered around her science project about local wildlife. She looked up with a bright smile that always made the small house feel warmer. "Good morning, Dad," she said cheerfully. Ethan smiled back. "Good morning, sweetheart. Pancakes first, homework later." Within minutes, the kitchen filled with the comforting smell of butter and fresh coffee. While pancakes browned on the skillet, Lily excitedly explained how she hoped her teacher would like the model she had spent all week building. Ethan listened carefully, never pretending to hear, while thinking about something else. He believed children remembered attention more than expensive gifts. After breakfast, he packed her lunch, checked that she had her homework, and drove her to the elementary school in his aging blue pickup truck. Before climbing out, Lily looked at him and said, "Do not work too hard today." Ethan chuckled softly. "I will try, but old trucks always seem to have other plans." Back at Walker Auto Repair, the day began like hundreds before it. Customers arrived one after another, bringing noisy engines, worn brakes, and faded family vehicles that had traveled thousands of honest miles across Nebraska highways. Ethan greeted everyone by name whenever he could. When an elderly rancher worried about an expensive repair bill, Ethan inspected the truck twice before explaining that only a simple hose needed replacing instead of the entire cooling system. The grateful customer shook his hand, amazed that anyone still chose honesty over profit. Ethan only smiled and returned to work. Along one wall of the garage hung neatly organized rescue equipment that many visitors hardly noticed. Orange life jackets, waterproof ropes, emergency blankets, and a volunteer rescue helmet waited silently beside his mechanic tools. For nearly 12 years, Ethan had volunteered with the county water rescue team, responding whenever storms or accidents threatened families near Silver Lake. He never considered it extraordinary. To him, helping people simply belonged beside fixing engines and raising Lily. Shortly before noon, the weather radio mounted above the workbench interrupted the steady rhythm of impact wrenches and air compressors with an urgent advisory. A powerful storm system was moving faster than expected, bringing severe winds, dangerous lightning, and rapidly changing lake conditions. Ethan paused only long enough to glance through the open garage door toward the darkening western sky. Thick gray clouds were already gathering across the horizon. Without saying a word, he quietly checked the fuel level in his rescue boat, inspected the emergency radio batteries, and made certain every rescue line remained securely fastened. A younger mechanic asked if he thought the storm would become serious. Ethan answered calmly, "The weather does not always give us a second warning." At that exact moment, more than 8,000 feet above Nebraska farmland, a sleek private business jet carrying Victoria Sterling toward an important corporate meeting entered the first turbulent edge of the approaching storm. While inside the cabin, a waterproof leather document case rested safely beside her seat, holding treasures that meant more to her than every dollar she had ever earned. The first heavy raindrops struck the roof of Walker Auto Repair just after 1 o'clock, followed by a distant rumble that rolled across the Nebraska countryside like an early warning no one could ignore. Ethan Walker had barely finished closing the garage doors when the emergency radio clipped to his workbench came alive with urgent voices speaking over bursts of static. "County Rescue, be advised. Possible aircraft emergency over Silver Lake. Repeat, possible aircraft emergency approaching Silver Lake." Ethan did not hesitate. He removed his mechanic gloves, reached for the orange life vest hanging beside the rescue ropes, and grabbed the waterproof emergency radio he had checked only minutes earlier. Another volunteer called over the radio, reporting that emergency crews were already moving toward the public boat launch. Ethan climbed into his aging pickup truck, hitched the rescue boat waiting behind it, and drove through sheets of rain toward the lake with calm determination rather than panic. He had learned years ago that fear only wasted the seconds people needed most. At the same time, inside the private business jet, Victoria Sterling remained remarkably composed despite the growing turbulence shaking the cabin. Outside the windows, thick clouds swallowed nearly every trace of daylight while rain streaked across the glass in endless waves. The pilots spoke calmly with air traffic controllers as warning lights illuminated portions of the instrument panel. Victoria rested one hand over the waterproof leather document case secured beside her seat. She had attended hundreds of business meetings during her career, negotiated billion-dollar agreements, and led one of the country's fastest-growing aerospace companies. Yet nothing inside that case involved contracts or financial reports. It contained ultrasound photographs, handwritten letters to the baby she hoped to meet in a few months, medical records, and tiny knitted baby socks her late mother had made years before. Those simple treasures meant more to her than every company she owned. Another burst of turbulence swept through the cabin. The pilots informed everyone that they would attempt an emergency landing on the calmest section of Silver Lake because continuing through the storm carried greater risk. Victoria quietly closed her eyes for a brief moment, whispered a simple prayer for her unborn child, and held the leather case tightly against her heart. Moments later, the aircraft touched the lake with surprising control before sliding across the wind-driven water. For a few precious seconds, everything seemed almost peaceful. Then powerful waves pushed against the aircraft, causing it to drift and slowly settle lower into the water. Rescue boats reached the scene quickly, and trained crews began helping passengers leave the aircraft in an orderly manner. One by one, they were guided safely toward waiting boats despite the relentless wind and rain. Ethan helped pull exhausted passengers aboard, offering blankets and reassuring words while constantly counting everyone who had been rescued. Just as the operation appeared complete, a shaken flight attendant suddenly looked back toward the partially submerged aircraft with wide, frightened eyes. "Wait," she cried through the storm. The woman in the front cabin never came out. Every face turned toward the slowly sinking jet. Rescue leaders exchanged worried glances as the weather continued to worsen by the minute. One officer quietly said that visibility had become too dangerous and the aircraft was becoming increasingly unstable. Ethan stared at the dark silhouette disappearing beneath the rain, tightened the straps of his life vest, clipped the rescue rope around his waist, and before anyone could stop him, he made one silent decision that would forever change his life as he disappeared back into the storm alone. Rain continued to sweep across Silver Lake as Ethan Walker followed the rescue rope through the cold water toward the partially submerged aircraft, keeping every movement steady and deliberate. The flashing emergency lights reflected across the waves, creating brief moments of visibility before darkness settled over the lake once again. He reached the cabin entrance, pulled himself inside, and listened carefully. The sound of water filled the narrow aisle, but somewhere ahead he heard a faint cough followed by a weak voice struggling to call for help. "I am here," Ethan called calmly. "Do not be afraid. We're going home." Guided only by the beam of his waterproof flashlight, he moved through the tilted cabin until he found Victoria Sterling still secured in her seat. She was conscious but disoriented, one hand wrapped tightly around the waterproof leather document case resting against her chest. Ethan quickly released the safety belt and offered his hand. "We have to leave now." Victoria looked directly into his eyes, her expression filled with determination rather than fear. "Please," she whispered, "do not leave this case behind." Ethan glanced briefly at the worn leather case, expecting important business papers or confidential company documents. He nodded without asking another question. "If it matters to you, it matters to me." Carefully helping her to her feet, he supported her as they slowly made their way back through the narrow cabin while the rescue rope remained their only reliable guide through the storm. Every step required patience, balance, and trust. When they finally emerged into the rain, waiting rescuers immediately helped bring both of them aboard the rescue boat. One medic wrapped a warm blanket around Victoria's shoulders while another examined her condition with reassuring calm. Ethan quietly handed the leather case back to her before stepping away to assist the rest of the rescue team. He never asked her name, and she never learned his. At Maple Ridge Regional Medical Center, doctors completed thorough examinations for every passenger brought in from the lake. Victoria remained under careful observation, grateful that both she and her unborn baby were safe. During a routine examination, one nurse carefully placed the waterproof leather case on a nearby table after noticing how tightly Victoria continued holding it. Another nurse asked gently, "Would you like me to keep this somewhere secure?" Victoria smiled softly and slowly opened the case instead. The room became completely silent. There were no financial documents, no confidential contracts, no jewelry, and no symbols of extraordinary wealth. Inside rested several ultrasound photographs carefully protected inside clear sleeves, handwritten letters addressed to a child who had not yet been born, a tiny pair of hand-knitted baby socks, and a family photograph of Victoria standing beside her late mother, whose smile seemed to fill the room with quiet warmth. One doctor looked at the keepsakes with genuine emotion before softly saying, "These are priceless." Victoria nodded as tears formed in her eyes. "They are everything I cannot replace." Later that evening, after receiving reassuring news that her pregnancy remained healthy despite the frightening experience, Victoria asked the hospital administrator only one question. She did not ask about the aircraft. She did not ask about insurance, company executives, or financial losses. Instead, she quietly said, "Who was the man who came back for me?" The administrator reviewed every available report before gently shaking his head. The rescue teams have been focused on saving lives, not recording names in the middle of the storm. No one could immediately identify the volunteer who had returned alone into the rain. Victoria looked out the hospital window toward the now peaceful lake, holding the leather case close once again, and silently promised herself that somehow, somewhere, she would find the ordinary man whose quiet dignity had protected a future more valuable than anything money could ever buy. The following morning dawned bright and calm, as though the storm had never touched Maple Ridge. Sunlight reflected across clean sidewalks, while local shop owners swept rainwater from their entrances and neighbors exchanged stories about the remarkable rescue that had dominated every conversation since the previous afternoon. Ethan Walker arrived at his garage before 7 o'clock, unlocked the front door, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and quietly returned to the pickup truck he had been repairing before the emergency interrupted his day. To him, there was nothing extraordinary about what had happened. Someone had needed help, and he had simply done what any decent person should do. His greatest concern that morning was making sure the truck was finished before its owner needed it for work. Across the state, however, events were unfolding very differently. Inside the executive conference room at Sterling Aerospace headquarters, senior advisors surrounded Victoria Sterling with reports detailing the aircraft incident, insurance assessments, and recommendations for handling the media attention that had already begun building nationwide. One executive suggested issuing a generous public reward. Another recommended establishing a charitable donation in the rescuer's honor. A third proposed purchasing whatever business the man owned and offering him a high-level position within the company. Victoria listened patiently before closing the folder in front of her. "None of those ideas begin to understand the man who saved me," she said quietly. The room fell silent. "He did not know who I was. He believed I was an ordinary passenger, and he still came back. If he had wanted recognition, he would have stayed at the hospital. If he had wanted money, he would have asked who I was. He asked for nothing." She instructed her security team to identify every volunteer who had participated in the rescue operation, refusing to stop until the mystery was solved. By late afternoon, one investigator returned with a simple report. The volunteer who had entered the aircraft a second time was Ethan Walker, owner of Walker Auto Repair in Maple Ridge, a widowed father raising his 9-year-old daughter, Lily. The report included photographs of the modest garage, records of Ethan's years of volunteer rescue service, and testimonials from neighbors describing his honesty. One sentence caught Victoria's attention more than any other. It noted that Ethan routinely reduced repair bills for families facing financial hardship and never advertised those acts of kindness. She looked at the photograph of the weathered garage for a long moment before softly smiling. "That is exactly who I hoped he would be." The next morning, she declined the company helicopter and requested a quiet drive to Maple Ridge instead. She ordered 3 black Cadillacs to accompany the trip, not to impress Ethan, but because her security team insisted upon standard executive protocol. As the vehicles entered the small town, curious residents paused to watch the unexpected procession. Children pointed from bicycles while farmers leaned against pickup trucks, wondering who could possibly deserve such an arrival. Victoria stepped from the center vehicle, carrying the familiar waterproof leather case in one hand, grateful that it represented the future her rescuer had protected. She spotted Ethan working beneath the raised hood of an old pickup truck exactly as the investigator had described. There were no cameras, no reporters, and no prepared speeches. Only an ordinary mechanic beginning another ordinary day. She walked toward him with quiet purpose, knowing that before she offered gratitude, gifts, or opportunities, she first wanted to honor the simple dignity of the man who had never asked for any of them. Victoria Sterling stood quietly in front of Ethan Walker while the entire street watched in respectful silence. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan finally smiled with the same calm expression he offered every customer who entered his garage. "I am glad you and your baby are safe," he said softly. Victoria lowered her eyes for a moment before holding up the familiar waterproof leather case. "You saved the only things that truly mattered to me," she replied. "I have been trying to find you since yesterday." Ethan nodded gently. "I am happy everything turned out all right." There was no pride in his voice and no expectation of praise. To him, the conversation already felt complete. One of Victoria's assistants stepped forward carrying a slim leather portfolio. He carefully removed a certified cashier's check and handed it to Victoria. She accepted it, but did not immediately extend it toward Ethan. Instead, she looked directly into his eyes. "This cannot repay what you did," she said. "Nothing can, but I hope you will accept it as gratitude." She unfolded the document and revealed a check written for $5 million. Gasps spread quietly through the small crowd gathered outside the garage. Even the town sheriff looked stunned. The amount represented more money than many people in Maple Ridge could imagine earning in a lifetime. Ethan glanced at the check only once before slowly folding it closed and handing it back with both hands. Victoria looked surprised. "Did I offend you?" she asked gently. Ethan shook his head. "Not at all." He smiled with quiet kindness before answering. "Helping someone come home should never become a business transaction." The words settled over the crowd with unexpected weight. Nobody interrupted. Nobody laughed. Victoria remained completely still, studying the ordinary mechanic standing before her. During years of negotiating billion-dollar agreements, she had met brilliant executives, ambitious investors, and influential leaders, yet very few people had ever refused money without hesitation. Ethan continued speaking in the same calm voice. "Yesterday, I did not know your name. I only knew someone still needed help. If I accept payment for doing what my conscience demanded, then next time I might start wondering who is worth saving. I never want that thought to enter my heart." Victoria felt tears gather once again, not from sadness but from profound respect. She carefully returned the check to the portfolio and nodded. "You have taught me something that no business school ever could." Ethan smiled awkwardly and scratched the back of his neck. "I only fix old trucks and volunteer when people need help." Lily stepped out of the garage carrying 2 paper cups of fresh coffee, unaware of the extraordinary conversation taking place. Ethan introduced his daughter with quiet pride. Victoria knelt to Lily's eye level and thanked her for sharing her father with the community whenever emergencies called him away. Lily simply smiled and replied, "My dad says people should always help each other because someday we might need someone to help us too." Victoria looked back at Ethan, realizing those simple words reflected the values that shaped his entire life. As the 3 Cadillacs prepared to leave, she made no further attempt to offer money. Instead, she quietly promised herself that if Ethan would not allow gratitude to become wealth, then she would find another way to transform his kindness into something that could protect countless lives for generations to come. Victoria Sterling returned to her headquarters carrying something far more valuable than the waterproof leather case that had survived the storm. She carried a new understanding of what genuine leadership looked like. During the next board meeting, executives expected discussions about quarterly growth, acquisitions, and expansion into new markets. Instead, Victoria walked to the front of the conference room and placed a single photograph on the screen behind her. It showed a modest brick garage with a weathered sign that simply read Walker Auto Repair. The room remained silent as she began speaking. "This building represents more integrity than many skyscrapers," she said calmly. She described the rescue without mentioning the size of her company or the value of the aircraft. She spoke only about an ordinary father who had risked everything for a stranger without expecting recognition, payment, or even a thank you. When she finished, one executive cautiously asked if she intended to establish a scholarship in Ethan's name. Another suggested creating a public relations campaign celebrating community heroes. Victoria gently shook her head. "He refused money because he believes kindness should multiply, not be purchased. If we truly want to honor him, then we must build something that allows his values to save people long after both of us are gone. Within days, architects, emergency response specialists, and local officials began designing a new community water rescue and safety center beside Silver Lake. The facility would provide free swimming lessons for children, emergency preparedness classes for families, volunteer rescue training, and modern equipment for first responders serving the entire region. When the initial plans were complete, Victoria personally drove back to Maple Ridge carrying rolled blueprints instead of financial documents. Ethan looked at the drawings spread across the workbench where he usually repaired engines and quietly studied every page without saying a word. Finally, Victoria asked, "Would you help us build this the right way?" Ethan looked surprised. "I am not an engineer." Victoria smiled warmly. "No, you're the reason it exists." He examined the layout once more before pointing to one corner of the building. "This room should be larger." One architect quickly explained that the current size already exceeded state recommendations. Ethan gently shook his head. "Not for equipment, for children. If they learn water safety before they become afraid of the water, they will remember those lessons for the rest of their lives." He pointed to another section of the blueprint. "The rescue boats should be closer to the launch ramp. During an emergency, 30 extra seconds can feel like forever." The architects immediately revised their plans. Victoria watched quietly as experienced professionals eagerly accepted advice from a humble mechanic who had never attended an executive meeting in his life. Before leaving, she noticed Ethan carefully placing the updated blueprints back into their protective case. "I still cannot accept your money," he reminded her gently. Victoria smiled with complete understanding. "I'm not asking you to accept money," she replied. "I am asking you to leave your fingerprints on a future that will protect families you will never meet." Ethan looked toward the lake where calm water reflected the evening sun, then toward the elementary school where Lily would soon finish another ordinary day. A quiet smile crossed his face. "If this place teaches even one child how to come home safely," he said softly, "then every hour will be worth it." Victoria nodded, knowing that the greatest gift she had received from the storm was not survival itself, but the chance to watch quiet dignity become a lasting legacy for an entire community. Construction began before. The first leaves turned golden, and for months the shoreline of Silver Lake echoed with the steady sounds of cranes, hammers, and hopeful conversations instead of emergency sirens. Local contractors worked beside volunteers from neighboring towns, donating weekends because they believed they were building something greater than another public facility. Ethan Walker continued repairing trucks every weekday. Yet whenever the garage closed for the evening, he quietly drove to the construction site wearing the same worn boots and faded work shirt that everyone recognized. He never gave speeches, never asked for recognition, and never allowed anyone to introduce him as a hero. Instead, he walked through unfinished classrooms, tested the placement of rescue equipment, and patiently demonstrated simple techniques that could help ordinary people remain calm during emergencies. Victoria Sterling visited whenever her schedule allowed, often leaving corporate meetings behind for a few peaceful hours beside the lake. She found herself looking forward to those visits more than any executive conference because they reminded her that the most meaningful progress could not always be measured on financial reports. One crisp Saturday morning, the completed Maple Ridge Community Water Rescue and Safety Center opened its doors for the very first time. Families filled the building with laughter, children eagerly explored the bright classrooms, and volunteers welcomed everyone with genuine warmth. Above the entrance hung a simple bronze plaque that carried only 7 words. "Quiet dignity saves lives." Ethan stood near the back of the gathering, hoping to avoid attention, but Victoria gently invited him to stand beside her as the ribbon was cut. "This place exists because one man believed every life deserved another chance," she said. Ethan lowered his eyes, uncomfortable with applause, and quietly replied, "This place exists because a whole community decided kindness should continue." The crowd responded with an even louder round of applause, not because of his modesty alone, but because everyone recognized the truth in his words. During the afternoon, the classrooms quickly filled, with children learning basic water safety. Lily Walker proudly volunteered as one of the student helpers, demonstrating how to wear a properly fitted life jacket and encouraging younger children who felt nervous around the practice pool. Her cheerful confidence made every lesson feel less like instruction and more like friendship. Ethan watched from across the room with quiet pride, realizing that his daughter was already becoming the kind of compassionate person every parent hopes to raise. Several months later, Victoria welcomed a healthy baby boy into the world. She named him James, and every time she held him, she remembered the storm that could have changed everything. The waterproof leather case remained safely stored in her home, not because she feared losing it again, but because it reminded her that true wealth had never been measured by possessions. One sunny afternoon, she visited Maple Ridge with baby James wrapped comfortably in a soft blue blanket. Ethan finished repairing a family station wagon just as she arrived. Lily hurried outside with a bright smile, eager to meet the little boy she had heard so much about. Victoria carefully placed James into Ethan's waiting arms. The baby looked up peacefully before wrapping his tiny fingers around one of Ethan's rough hands. No words were needed. The gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass across the quiet town, while the calm waters of Silver Lake shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. In that simple moment, surrounded by ordinary people living ordinary lives, everyone present understood that one selfless decision made during a storm had grown into a legacy of hope that would continue protecting families for generations yet to come. 1 year passed, and life in Maple Ridge settled into a peaceful rhythm that quietly reflected the lasting impact of a single selfless decision. Every Saturday morning, the Maple Ridge Community Water Rescue and Safety Center welcomed families from across Nebraska. Children laughed as they practiced swimming with certified instructors. Parents learned emergency preparedness, and new volunteers trained beside experienced rescue teams. The building had become more than a public facility. It had become a place where ordinary people discovered that courage was not something reserved for extraordinary moments. It was a choice made one small act of kindness at a time. Ethan Walker never accepted a management office or an official title. He continued opening Walker Auto Repair before sunrise, greeting customers with the same quiet smile, repairing aging pickup trucks with honest workmanship, and returning home each evening in time to share dinner with Lily. Whenever someone praised him for inspiring the rescue center, he always answered the same way. Good people built this place together. I only happened to be there when someone needed help. His words never changed because neither did his heart. Lily had grown more confident through her volunteer work at the center. She now helped younger children learn basic water safety every weekend, encouraging them with patience that reminded many people of her father. Watching her explain how to fasten a life jacket correctly filled Ethan with a deeper pride than any award could ever provide. He realized that kindness had become part of her character long before she fully understood its value. On a warm spring afternoon, Victoria Sterling returned to Maple Ridge carrying little James in her arms. He was now a cheerful toddler with curious blue eyes and an endless smile that brightened every room he entered. As soon as he saw Ethan standing near the boat dock speaking with a group of young volunteers, James reached both hands toward him with unmistakable excitement. Ethan laughed softly, lifted the little boy into his arms, and gently settled him against his shoulder. James wrapped his tiny arms around Ethan's neck as though greeting an old friend. Victoria watched the quiet moment with grateful eyes. "He always smiles when he sees your picture at home," she said. Ethan chuckled. "I think he is simply being polite." Victoria smiled and gently shook her head. "No, some bonds begin long before memories do." Together they walked along the peaceful shoreline where calm water reflected the afternoon sunlight. Nearby, dozens of children practiced rescue drills while parents applauded every successful exercise. The sound of laughter replaced the fear that had once defined the lake. Victoria stopped beside the bronze plaque at the entrance and slowly read the familiar words once more. "Quiet dignity saves lives." She turned toward Ethan. You refused every reward I tried to give you. But because of that, thousands of families have received something far greater. Ethan looked across the lake where volunteers launched a rescue boat for another training exercise. Kindness grows best when nobody owns it, he replied. As the evening sun settled behind the trees, the community gathered for a simple photograph outside the rescue center. Farmers stood beside firefighters, teachers beside mechanics, business leaders beside volunteers, children beside grandparents. There were no reserved places and no special seats. Ethan stood with Lily at one side, while Victoria held James nearby, every face reflecting gratitude rather than pride. When a camera captured the moment, no one was thinking about a billionaire, an airplane, or 3 luxury cars. They were remembering that the greatest miracles often begin with an ordinary person choosing compassion over convenience. Wealth could build beautiful buildings, but only character could fill them with purpose. Fame could inspire attention for a season, but quiet dignity could inspire generations. And in the peaceful heart of a small Nebraska town, one humble father proved that the richest legacy anyone could ever leave behind was not measured by what they kept for themselves, but by how many lives found hope because they simply chose to help.